As time goes on, I'm seeing more and more people say that the NES library is simply hard to go back to, whether it's the general fatigue from games like Super Mario Bros. 1 and Zelda 1 getting sold to people over and over again in slightly different ways in an attempt to seem exciting, to random games popping up on the Nintendo Switch Online service that may be kinda neat at first glance, but don't really do much to stimulate your mind like how games on the Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis do. But I have spent years essentially studying the NES library, and I really do think that this console gets a bad rap. There are still plenty of great games on this console. Most likely, you haven't played a good chunk of them, and it's easy to see why many of them are not as accessible as they should be. For these games, my mentality is if it's readily available for purchase, then you should support it. If not, just emulate it. I don't really care. Realistically, a lot of these games are simply easier to go through if you have access to the common emulator features like save states and rewinds. There's a lot of these games I just wouldn't be playing if I had to deal with the quote classic NES difficulty that people tend to bring up as if it's some sort of selling point. A lot of these games weren't built to last, so here are 20 plus NES games that still hold up today with a big asterisk. If you play them with the emulator features, you get it, you know, whatever. Let's go on. As far as NES games go that actually come from Nintendo, the only ones that I think don't get the respect they deserve is the Star Tropics duology. And if you haven't played this game with save states or rewinds, I could kind of understand why it would probably get a little bit disrespect because, you know, I like these games a lot, but there is a lot of garbage. There's a lot of that. But in these adventures, you take control of Mike Jones, and in the first game, you're going on a giant ocean-faring adventure to save your uncle from aliens, and in the second game, it's like about time travel to find Tetris pieces, and then you're helping out a bunch of characters, like prominent figures from history, like Cleopatra, by getting her chicken nuggets. It's weird. The second game is a little bit weird. It's fun, but it's very weird. The first game, I think, is a lot better. But the structure of these games is pretty basic. You start off by walking around these towns and talking to everybody, and I mean quite literally everybody. Like, you can't progress into the very first dungeon until you talk to every single person in the first village, even though nothing indicates that that is a thing. Like, once again, there's a lot of garbage with this game. And then you go into these dungeons, and you have this sort of chess-like approach with these characters, and then you move block by block every single time, and the same thing goes for the enemies. And it controls very stiff. However, the level design is based around that play control, so I kind of think it works okay. You have a yo-yo that you can use. You eventually get a whole bunch of different weapons. You take out these big bosses. The story takes a lot of little fun twists and turns every now and then, every time you get to a new village. It's just a nice, charming adventure. Like, okay, your main helper in your ship is Rob the Robot. That's fun, but where the BS shows up is that sometimes you'll jump to the next screen of a dungeon and boom, you're dead. You went into the wrong door, idiot. You got stuff like that. You got figuring out how the enemies work. It could be a very frustrating experience, but quite frankly, this game is a lot better when you have the rewind, only because this game should be a little bit more forgiving right out of the gate. The second adventure, Zoda's Revenge, does address a lot of the control issues because you control a whole lot more smoothly during the dungeons. However, the dungeons are still designed like the original game by being these block by block patterns, so it does control better, but in a level design that doesn't really match it, so you might find yourself walking off of cliffs a little bit more often. It's unfortunate, because the second game is still fun, but it really doesn't hit the highs of the first game. But to be fair, I wonder if you can even argue the first game has a lot of highs. It's just a very cool, charming adventure that I think would have a lot of potential in a modern aesthetic with the new reboot and whatnot. But as it currently stands, Star Tropics is just a 1-2 punch of NES goodness. The second game didn't even release in Japan. That's weird for a Japanese company, but it didn't do that. So, you know, I say if you want a little bit of Nintendo history, give Star Tropics 1 and 2 a shot. Now, Blaster Master certainly isn't a hidden gem, but in terms of the topic of NES games that still hold up, man, this deserves to be top of the list because it is so damn good. If you haven't played this classic before, or you've only played the newer trilogy, the Blaster Master Zero trilogy, which are very good in their own right, this classic original game is still so damn good. It is just straight action from start to finish. There's no crazy story that involves like a plant lady that's very well endowed. But to be fair, the story in this first game is you have a frog that absorbs a lot of radiation and then jumps down a hole, and then you jump down the hole, and then there's a tank called the Sophia the Third, and then you're like, okay, I'm gonna find my frog, I guess. In Japan, it's actually a bit of like a space opera war that takes place, and that makes a little more sense. They incorporate that into the Zero trilogy a little bit more. But yeah, you're just gonna go save your frog, and you do that with 2D platforming with Sophia the Third, or you can hop out, just be your little guy, and then go into these dungeons where now it is a top-down gameplay. And it's really cool because these two components really work together hand in hand, because these dungeons could sometimes have nothing in them. They're a component of the exploration that you do during the 2D segments. But eventually, you find the right dungeon, you take the right paths in the dungeon, you take down this big boss, and then you're able to progress in a little bit of a Metroid style. I wouldn't say Metroidvania, but just in the sense of you beat a boss, and then you can progress to the new area by this big door that you find. It really is a little bit of what you see is what you get with this game. Of course, the difficulty ramps up. You get different guns that power up over time. It's pretty standard stuff in terms of that. Like, obviously, the Blaster Master Zero trilogy later on does a whole lot more to spice things up in the moment-to-moment gameplay, but this classic is still super solid. Maybe a little bit too BS with some of the bosses, because they are pretty difficult. This is a tough game. Blaster Master 1, the original, super good. Don't even look at Blaster Master 2, because man, it exists, and God, it's bad. Fire and Ice is my typical answer when someone asks me what my favorite NES game is that nobody talks about, because nobody talks about this game, and God, it's so good. As far as a puzzle game goes, this is pretty top tier. So there's another game on the NES called Solomon's Key, and admittedly, I'm not really much of a fan. I don't like how it looks. I'm not really a fan of how it plays, but the same basic idea of like, okay, I can place a wand down and then a platform will appear. That is the same thing here, because this is actually Solomon's Key 2 in Japan. But this is way better because it's just based off of there's a bunch of fire blocks in the area, figure out how to get the ice blocks to them. That's it. Hence the title Fire and Ice. So clever. The thing I really like about this game is that it's very tough, like right off the bat. You have to really sit back and think about every individual move and just hope you're making the right ones. And this is where the rewind function will come in handy, because if you screw up once, you have to restart the entire thing. And that sucks. That is very clearly not a modern way of handling puzzle games. But once you have that benefit of a rewind, this game is so damn good when you're able to just look at every single move and go bit by bit instead of planning the entire thing out at once, because man, this game is tough. You can't jump, you can't push more than one block at a single time. Your wand can only place an ice block below you. You can't go parallel to you or above you. Nah, it's just straight diagonal across from you. The only thing you can really take advantage of is placing some blocks down and then removing the blocks under them to have the ice blocks fall, whatever. As you can see here, it is a very much what you see is what you get type of scenario. It gets very tough, and man, something about the aesthetic of it, there's like a cutscene thing where your grandmother is telling you, I guess it's you, a story. I don't really know how that really plays into things, but whatever. It brings me to a world map. Every single world has 10 rounds. The 10th round is like a bit of a boss challenge almost, with the scrolling screen, and you have like a more strict time limit. It's pretty cool. You know, the tension is definitely built there. But yeah, I just think it's a really cool puzzle game. I think it's a very unique idea. I like that it's very challenging, and all that's really holding it back is the lack of a rewind function. But now, with the glorious nature of modern emulators, you can just have it with you, no problem. This game becomes a lot more palatable. Fire and Ice, damn good game. Joy Mech Fight is another game from Nintendo, this time just for the Famicom. It did not get localized, and I think this game deserves a lot of credit because it is a fully functional two-person fighting game, and it's really fun. You know, I don't think there's going to be any sort of crazy competitive scene with this. It is very basic. It's a classic game, so there's only 2 buttons, but you know what? Over 30 characters in this game, and there is a lot of repetition amongst them, like there's only so much you can do, but that's a lot. There's a lot that you can work with there. I don't know if there's a tier list, but man, there's a lot of options in this game. And I really like the art style too, these floating head and body parts. Like, I think that makes the game look very smooth because you're not worried about trying to have a bunch of body parts that are moving around each other and trying to look all fluid on the NES. It's just a bunch of flying circles going all over the place where you still know exactly what's going on. So that deserves a lot of praise. It's no Street Fighter, it's no Marvel, it's no Tekken, but damn it, it's Joy Mech Fight, and if they thought that it was a good enough game to put Sukapon in Smash Brothers, then damn it, it's worth a shot. There is a story, who cares? Just go kick the other robots' asses. Adventure Island is definitely an NES classic. Like, it is so NES core, it's ridiculous. There's a bunch of different games in this franchise, and some are good, some are not so good. In terms of the NES library, I would argue that the first game really doesn't hold up at all. Games 2 and 3, kind of okay. But yo, Adventure Island 4? I couldn't believe it. This game actually slaps. It's a Metroidvania that has a bunch of mini games for progression. Wow. And this is one of the only ones they didn't localize. That's a damn shame. Adventure Island is typically, okay, you start at the left, you gotta run to the right, you got a food meter, which is basically just a time limit, and it's a bunch of challenging BS platforming a lot of the times, but hey, they added vehicles in games 2 and 3 with these dinosaurs you can ride. Cool. But nah, man, this is a full world here. Your girlfriend is also safe. There's just like an evil thing that has taken your dinosaur buddies, as well as also just like, oh, it's a bad guy, you gotta go get the bad guy. So you explore all the different corners of this big island, you take on these mini games for some items that you can get, like extra heart points and maybe some extra weapons, and then yeah, it's still pretty short because it's an NES game. Like, maybe it took me an hour and a half, 2 hours to beat, but it was pretty consistently fun all the way through. I am shocked. However, once again, this is a game that definitely, I think, needs rewind capabilities, because when you die at all in this game, and it is very likely that you will because it is still tough, you lose everything. Like, I think some of your progress is still there in terms of doors that are open and whatnot, but you lose all of your weapons as garbage, actually. I think that's a garbage thing, so I would make a lot of save states just on the off chance, like, I didn't want to die, because dying in this game has one of the most strict punishments of any game I've ever played, ever. Imagine dying in Metroid and you gotta get all your weapons back when you die once. Negative. I can't believe they did that. But the game looks good, it has a really nice, charming soundtrack, it plays well, there's less BS than in the other Adventure Island games in terms of enemies just popping up out of nowhere and a lot of risk-adult platforming. But if you're willing to just deal with basic emulator functions, then I gotta tell you, man, Adventure Island 4, this game's something special. There are other open-world type games in this franchise, but I would go as far as to say that this is the best Adventure Island game yet. And that's assuming they'll ever make another one. Not likely. Gun Knack. I just think this is a really fun shooter. I think it has cool aesthetics. I think the music is bright and peppy. You fight animals as the bosses, like a robotic rabbit and eventually an octopus. There's this charming little blue-haired girl that offers you power-ups in between stages. It's just a nice, weird little shooter. That's all I got for it. You know, there's a lot of super basic shooters on the NES, but this one's my favorite. Not the only one we're going to be talking about today, but if you want a really quality and pretty impressive shooter in terms of variety on this console, Gun Knack is the way to go. So this is another great shooter, Summer Carnival 92 Rekka, but it's not so much for its mechanics, which are pretty solid, but the fact that this game is able to run at all is insane. I don't really know a ton of the lore about this game's existence, but quite frankly, you don't really need to. By playing enough NES games, you can know that what you're seeing right now shouldn't really be possible. This game runs at a smoothness that I can't fathom. I do not understand how there are so many moving parts on screen at all times, and it looks as good as it does. There's a lot of sprite flickering, but it still runs damn near flawlessly. This is incredibly impressive. Compared to Gun Knack, Rekka is definitely a lot more difficult, so if you want to take advantage of emulator functions, by all means. I don't like to do that with my shooters. Personally, I do like to try to learn how these shooters work, but I've still not gotten around to beating this one, because it's very tough. This is a hard game. And part of my brain just assumes that when there's so much going on, I'm like waiting for the slowdown to kick in and I can maneuver around it, but nah. It's just, you got no time to really blink in this game. Summer Carnival 92 Rekka, not the best shooter on this console, but one of the most impressive games for the NES, no question. Games like Mega Man and Contra take all the glory when it comes to NES run-and guns, but dude, Journey to Silus. Oh my god, this game is sick. Initially, this was meant to be a tie-in game with the Terminator movie franchise, which would have been pretty cool, but now it's actually just its own dedicated thing. You play as a guy whose father was killed in some terrorist attack, so now you're gonna go and avenge him. So you're just this guy running across these alien-like environments, and it's sick. What it comes down to is it plays super well, the music is phenomenal, the graphics are really good, and while there is challenge, this is some of the fairest challenge on the NES. Like, the only big issue, in my opinion, is that sometimes when you're falling, you carry a lot of momentum with you, so you might run into things as you're falling that you don't want to. But in general, man, this is like a damn near perfect experience. Plus, it's also pretty short. Like, once you really get good at this game, it's definitely less than an hour long. There's not a whole lot to it, but this is also one of the games that helped put Sunsoft on the map. They also made Blaster Master, but in my opinion, in terms of a run and gun game goes, which I would kind of consider Blaster Master to be, I kind of like this game more. And if you don't believe me, quite frankly, just go and listen to the soundtrack. Just go listen to Stage 1. Just imagine running and gunning to Stage 1 from Journey to Silus, and you can see, okay, yeah, this game is pretty badass. Because yeah, Journey to Silus is badass. Of course, I gotta rep my boys at HAL Labs. Here we have the Adventures of Lolo trilogy. If you didn't know, yeah, Lolo from the Kirby's Adventure game actually has his own series, and the series actually predates Kirby. So those bosses in Kirby is actually a clever throwback to one of HAL's previous works. Pretty cool. All three games here though are basically identical. It's just a ton of floors of these top-down puzzle rooms where you gotta collect all these emblems, you gotta avoid dying to the enemies, and then you just rinse and repeat that for dozens and dozens of floors ad nauseum until you get to the credits of each game. Not much more to it than that, but still pretty cool. They do try to spice things up the further along you get in this trilogy, because eventually you can play as La, and there's like this top-down overworld exploration. Okay, that's kind of cool. They tried to change up the story a little bit, but the core gameplay is exactly the same in all of them. And thankfully, while this game is pretty difficult the further along you get, it's not as punishing as Fire and Ice is, because in here, if you have to replay the entire floor, which is very possible, it takes a whole lot less time, so that's nice. Still tough, but very much so less painful. It's pretty easy for puzzle games to hold up to the test of time, because outside of just general console shenanigans like not having rewinds, for example, are the only things holding them back. This is a super solid idea for a very basic puzzle game. If you want more of that for an 8-bit console, Adventures of Lolo is the way to go. While we're still on the topic of HAL Labs, why not? Here is the new Ghostbusters 2. I still can't believe this game is by the same guys who made Kirby's Adventure. They made a Ghostbusters game. That's crazy. What's nice about this game is that even though you should probably watch the Ghostbusters movies, they are very good. You don't really need to know a whole lot about this to go in. There are plenty of references, but the gameplay loop is just nice, simple fun. You play as two of the Ghostbusters, you run around these areas, you find ghosts, and then you gotta bust them. As simple as that. What's impressive is that you're only really controlling one guy at any given time, and what you do is you'll hold them down with the beam, and then the other guy will go in and then catch him. And amazingly enough, they never really bump into each other. Like you would think, I don't know, I would just assume that it would be a little cumbersome to control two characters at the same time on the NES, but no, it controls pretty well. It's very much a requirement for it to play really nicely. I love the chibi art style. I think the music is really nice and bouncy. The level variety is on point. The challenge is just right. Not too hard, not too easy, especially when it comes to the boss battles. Once again, that's very important. And there's really no downtime in this game whatsoever. You may not like one level because like the lava-ish looking level is a little slower than the other ones, but it's still pretty fun. And hey, maybe if you've never actually watched the original Ghostbusters movies, then play this game, let this be the catalyst for you to watch those movies, because some classics there too. The new Ghostbusters 2 for the NES by the same guys who made Kirby's Adventure. That's insane. That's an insane thing to say out loud. Now this is just a weird game that I've been fascinated with ever since I learned about it. Biomiracle Bokute Upa. It is a 2D platformer where you play as a baby. Yep, it's not like some crazy thing where you have like you're just a super powered baby or the chosen one. Like there may be a plot attached to this, I don't know. But you play as a baby with a rattler and you're exploring all these lands, defeating enemies so they don't kill you. Okay, sure. It's not like this is the greatest platformer of all time. I mean, it's functional. Like the variety is there, like the level designs are cool. You have like these candy lands, you got these nice underwater stages that, you know, for NES standards, pretty good. The whole mechanic of hitting an enemy with a rattler and then they inflate and then you can bounce them around. That's pretty fun. You know, it's really not gonna blow you away in terms of mechanics. I just can't believe it's a 2D platformer where you play as a baby. It's insane. It's an insane thing. That's just an insane thing. But one thing that is nice with a lot of the 2D platformers that are on NES is that a lot of them don't really try to do anything crazy. A lot of them just try to be these fun little times that you don't got to think too much about. And this game falls into that category easily. Biomiracle Bokute Upa. It's a fun little game where you play as a baby. someone out there has a favorite protagonist in a platformer, and it's this little baby, and more power to you. It's weird that this exists, man. But you know what's even weirder? Noah's Ark for the NES is by the same guys at Konami. What? I know it's very easy to think that all the Bible-based games on the NES are bad, which, hey, to be fair, they basically all are, and I don't even know if I would consider this to be a Bible game. It is based off of the story of Noah's Ark. You play as Noah, and he doesn't look like he wants to be there. You can shoot things. I guess they're arrows. They go by really quickly. I've always just assumed that it's like acid spit. You know, I think that it's funnier that way. And you're killing a bunch of the animals that stand in your way, which is completely against what Noah's whole thing is about, saving the animals. And you deal with this sort of very slow auto-scrolling platformer where you can actually manipulate the speed by moving faster than the screen allows, which it's amazing more auto-scrolling games don't do that anyway. And you take down these big evil bosses, you know, as Noah is known to do. There's a level then when you turn into a fish, and then you take out some natives. Man, this is weird. It's weird, but you know what? It's actually pretty fun. I'm not gonna lie. A lot of the times I pull this game up just to impress people by the fact that this game exists, but then I keep playing it because it is fun. The thing is though, once again, like a lot of other games I've talked about today, the rewind function or the save state function really comes in handy because despite having a life bar on the top left screen at all times, some enemies take like half your health. And it doesn't really matter, like, what enemy it is doesn't matter. Like, it'll just, oh, this thing can take out half your health now, cool, get used to it. And then you die, back to the start. Could be very frustrating because there is a whole lot of imbalance here. Dude, look at this Hornet boss. Are you joking? It's funny because this isn't the only Noah's Ark game on the NES. There is another one inside of one of those Bible multi-carts that are all, you know, all the rage in terms of bad NES games, but this is the better one, and it's by Konami. Not the greatest platformer on the console by any means, but damn, it's hilarious that this game isn't bad. Noah's Ark for the NES comes recommended. Konami with a doubleheader of, what the hell are you talking about? Unlike some of the other games I've talked about today, I just think that this game is a flat-out gem from start to finish without needing the emulator functions. Little Samson is just a damn good 2D platformer. And to play this game, you will need to take advantage of emulator functions because there's a good chance you're not going to own it. This has the distinction of being one of the most expensive games in the entire catalog of the console, and no matter what price you find it for, it's not that good. But it's still good. It's still a fun little game. The start of the game, you play as Samson. You got this thing where you can shoot a bunch of bells. That's your projectile. It makes an annoying little chime every time you throw it out. That's unfortunate. But you can climb walls and stuff, and you can tell the vibes are there. Like, the music is nice, the sprite work is really well done, but then eventually, you add more characters to your arsenal. You get this dragon that can fly and shoot fire. You get this little mouse thing that can crawl up walls a whole lot faster, and it's a lot shorter, so you can go into places that you can't as the other characters. And you got this big stone guy with a detachable arm. He's cool too. And when you play as any of them, it changes the music to their theme. Not the greatest call, I guess. Some of the music can be a little repetitive in that instance, but hey, it's still a good time. I think Little Samson holds up to the test of time because, once again, you don't really need those NES emulator functions to make it more playable. There are some frustrations in there for sure, but this is one of the most finely built platformers on the console, which makes sense. It is a very late release. The fact that this game has 4 different playable characters that you can swap on the fly, and the level design is perfectly built around using all 4 of their capabilities, is really commendable. Little Samson is a perfect example of why I've been an advocate for classic game emulation for so long. For some reason, this game just has never shown up on any other digital store, at least at the time of this video, but it's still such a damn good game that deserves to be played, for its impressive nature on the NES to just being a good 2D platformer. Go play Little Samson, damn good time. We have another top-down puzzle game where you play as just a little guy, and it's also ice-themed. I'm okay with there being consistent themes through some of these games. In Kickle Cubicle, you play as Kickle. There's an evil king who has imprisoned people inside of these little dream bags across the stages, and you gotta go save them and defeat the bad guy. Of course I will do that, why not? The way this puzzle game works is that you have the ability to place ice blocks and then shove them. You can do this to the enemies too, which is important because it's a one-hit death. Make your way through all of the stages, get all the dream bags, and then eventually you take out these bosses. Bada bing, bada boom, that's Kickle Cubicle. If you take anything away from this video, it's that the world would be a whole lot more better off if we had more puzzle games featuring just little guys going on little adventures. I think we would be much better off as a society. So I'm actually a big fan of arcadey baseball games. That was my favorite sport growing up, and I just loved some of the video games I was able to get for it. The NES does have a few classics like Baseball Stars, that's a good game, but for me, Bad News Baseball was always the top tier one. And it may not even be the best one. This is purely nostalgia talking. I think there may be some complexity in there in terms of your roster of characters and if they're good at hitting and fielding and like I think you have that level of control. I don't really care about all that. I just pick a team that I'm feeling like that day, and then it's as simple as I press one button to swing. If I'm the pitcher, I press one button to pitch, and then I just hope to God I'm able to pick the ball up if it hits the field and throw it to the bases. Like it's just baseball by the numbers, nothing crazy. You don't really got to care about the characters individually, like their backstories and how they were in college, none of that stuff. It's just good old-fashioned baseball with a damn cool art style, and there's a rabbit as umpires throughout it's great. Dude, look at the animations when you get a home run, man. This game has so much charm, I love it, and who the hell is that guy? I still don't know. Get a buddy to play Player 2 with you, and you're gonna have a damn good time, and it's gonna be in and out in like 20-30 minutes. These games go by so fast, it's great. God, I love Bad News Baseball so much. Konami obviously had a very impressive run on the NES. We've already talked about Konami in this video with Noah's Ark, which is still crazy. Of course, you got games like Castlevania, they did the Turtles games, there's Gradius, which is really good, but for me, Jackal is the best game Konami made for the console. It's pretty straightforward. You drive around these big war zones in a Jeep, you have a machine gun and a grenade launcher, you gotta go to these areas and liberate prisoners, and then just kill all the opposition. Super straightforward, but the music is so damn good. Co-op is an option. That's all you need for a sick action game on the NES. It's so wild to think that this was a time where there were so many video games based off of a war zone, and they actually focused on the gameplay first and foremost. Like, this is so fun. They could have done so many different things with this war zone-like area, but nah, you're just playing as this Jeep who has all this crazy free control with a machine gun that can clearly take out anything in the opposition, and you feel like a badass while doing it. And this is another game where you do not need to rely on emulator functions to be good. The challenge is just right, and once again, if you bring a buddy along, you're gonna have a damn good time. So many other Konami franchises would go on to be these massive successes and multi-game long franchises that are still going on to this day, but they were firing on all cylinders with Jackal. The fact that this is the only game in this series, you can't even call it a series. Shame. Jackal is sick. So admittedly, I'm not the biggest fan of beat-em-ups. Like, that genre has never really hit me. There are a few games that stand out, of course, like Scott Pilgrim in terms of modern-ish games, sure. And I say this because the Super Nintendo Final Fight games, I'm actually not that big of a fan of. Something about them never really clicked with me. And maybe, I don't know, maybe it's because the art style isn't chibi enough, because Mighty Final Fight is my favorite game in the franchise, and it's so cool. Its biggest downside is that there's no multiplayer, it is single player only, which is very bizarre for a beat-em-up. But I do think it makes up for it by having just really fun, simple controls, by having a really cool art style with really great animations, and a super catchy soundtrack. Similar to how Konami was firing on all cylinders with Jackal, Capcom was firing on all cylinders with Mighty Final Fight. They didn't need to go this hard with what is essentially a demake of the first Final Fight game, because like the story is basically the same here. There's an evil street gang in Metro City, they've taken Mayor Hagar's daughter, and you and two other people, Cody and Guy, just go out to kick everyone else's ass and then get the girl back. Sure, and it's crazy because the Super Nintendo games don't have all three characters playable in single cartridges, but here, nah, you can play as all three. Obviously not at the same time, but that's a feather on the NES caps that they for some reason couldn't do on the Super Nintendo. That's cool. You got a bunch of special moves over time because you're leveling up as you're playing. There are power-up items. You can eventually get weapons like a knife and shurikens and stuff. It's a short game. Once again, NES, less than an hour long, but it is consistently super good and you consistently feel, once again, like a badass. A lot of NES games really tried to hammer in that feeling, and this game does that too. Mighty Final Fight is the best beat-em-up on the console, and yeah, it's the best Final Fight game. That may upset some hardcore retro game purists, I don't know. That's just how I sees it. Dude, the final boss in this game is the same guy as the final boss of the main Final Fight games, but now he's a cyborg. I need more beat-em-ups that are stupid. This is great. The Statue of Liberty's in the back there, dude. Oh, God, I love this game. Without a doubt, my favorite run and gun on this console is Metal Storm. Because yeah, typical running and gunning mechanics, sure, you can shoot up, which is nice, obviously Mega Man can't do that, but at the press of 2 buttons, at up in A or down in A, you can just swap gravity on the fly and suddenly you're on the ceiling. So being able to shoot up or down from whichever position you are to tackle all these robotic enemies and whatnot, God, it feels so cool. Like, once again, it's a game where you feel like a badass because you have so much more fine control than any of the Mega Man games, any of the Contra games. This game is just flat out better. Aesthetically, it's gorgeous, like the detail on your suit is great. There's parallax scrolling at all times, and it just looks super awesome. The music, God, the music just hits you in your soul. It's so good and so ominous when you get to the boss battle themes. The bosses are also very big and intimidating. You get a bunch of power-ups along the way, like different guns. You have this thing where you turn into a fireball when you shift gravity that can come in handy. There is a boss rush near the end of the game, and I was never a fan of when games do that, but that is one little downside compared to the rest of the game, which is a damn near flawless masterpiece. It is a very tough game as well, so if you resort to save states, I'm not going to be offended by it, but learning how this game works and learning how to be good is some of the best experiences I've ever had with this console. Metal Storm, as far as I'm concerned, 10 out of 10 game. Sometimes you just gotta rep a game for its immaculate vibes, and Gargoyle's Quest 2, the vibes are perfect. This is such a fascinating little side series of the Ghosts and Goblins franchise because you just play as the Red Demon, Firebrand, from the very start of that first Ghosts and Goblins game, and they just gave him his own little platformer trilogy, and I think they're all great. Like, I want to do a whole video on just this trilogy in the future because it's just so damn cool. But what we have here is a sort of 2D platformer with RPG explorations combined. You explore the underworld, you get to talk to a bunch of people, go to these different towns, and on your pathway to the different towns, you have platforming challenges where you're climbing on top of buildings, you're exploring these caves, you can do this little hover move with your wings, you can climb up walls, you can upgrade your shot that you can shoot out of your mouth, and just the creepy Halloween-like vibes here. I love this. I love it so much. It would become a whole lot better when we get to Demon's Crest on the Super Nintendo, but something about its ease of play, I do like Gargoyle's Quest 2 a little bit more. There are some platforming sections that are more challenging than they need to be. You gotta really fine tune when you use your hover to expand a really long jump, but it's not that difficult in the grand scheme of things. I do remember pulling up a guide every so often with this game because there are some items like these maelstroms, which are extra lives. I wanted to maximize my game so I didn't have to deal with game overs all the time, and there were some challenges there in terms of knowing where everything is for sure, but give it a little bit of time, learn how the platforming works, learn how to maximize when to use your shot and when to hold back for a second, and maybe when you play this game, turn down the lights, light a candle, oh, you're gonna be immersed in some NES goodness that you probably didn't even know was possible. And then play the first game on the Game Boy and Demon's Crest on the Super Nintendo. This is a damn good trilogy, man. Capcom, ooh, they were cooking with this. Panic Restaurant is very similar to Little Samson in that the game goes for a lot of money if you want to get a physical cartridge. It has not shown up in any other digital store for some reason that I don't understand, and for me, it does two things extraordinarily well. It's a 2D platformer where you play as a little guy going on a little adventure. In this case, it is a little chef with a big old floppy mustache and you got a frying pan. That's cute, because the second thing is it's all food themed. You're a chef, your restaurant has been taken over by the evil O-Dove, and you have to explore a bunch of different lands based on a bunch of different food groups to take your restaurant back. Charming visuals, charming music, nice easy difficulty, it's really not that challenging whatsoever. And outside of the ice level, which is a little bit annoying, really not a fan of slippery ice mechanics, especially in NES games. This is just another really fun 2D platformer that has an aesthetic that I have not really seen replicated in any game since. Panic Restaurant is a gem, and once again, requires emulation to play in any modern capacity because as good as this game is, don't buy it. Until it shows up on a digital store, don't buy it because it is not worth this much. And that is going to wrap up my 20 plus NES games that still hold up today list. Now I know that there are plenty of other titles out there that are still worth your time, plus there's a lot of homebrew games that show up too. There's a whole lot of official games that release all the way up into the early 90s, but there are still so many great NES games that are releasing to this day that are just not officially licensed by Nintendo. I know there's a bunch of glaring omissions in this video by not talking about the Disney Capcom games, but I want to save those for another time because there's a whole lot to talk about there. There's a whole lot there. There's double-digit games in that conversation I want to have one day. Besides, you already know DuckTales is a jam. I don't need to say it. So go back, get cultured at some classic 80s and early 90s gaming with the NES, and come back to me. Let me know if your opinion changes. If you were someone who thought that, hey, I just don't like the NES period, you never know. Maybe a game like Little Samson will be the thing that brings you right back. And to end things off, Pictionary is also really cool, because it has one of the greatest soundtracks of all time. That's all I got. Bye, everyone.